Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello, Alison.
Hi, Andrea. Hi, how are you?
Good. Morning for me, afternoon for you. And we're recording something slightly different, actually, today. This is a kind of different recording, and we wanted to put this out as a bonus episode and get it in you guys' hands as quickly as possible.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea, for jumping on this and getting hold of the person who you talked to, recording it, because he was in Hawaii, I think, and of course you're in Washington State. When you did it, I was tucked up in my bed, fast asleep, so thank you for being able to do it.
Yeah. It was, I was really excited when I'll just tell you what actually inspired me to have this conversation at all. And so listeners know, if I can even get my words out in a coherent sentence.
I'd love to hear.
Quetzal and I recorded this interview. Alison wasn't able to be on just because time zones were a challenge for this one. But So I follow Quetzal's account on Instagram. It's at Wild Quetzal, and I'll link that in the show notes so everybody can just click on that there. Sabrina was the one who actually sent his account over to me and said, "Oh, you would love this." And Sabrina's, part of our amazing production crew now. So thank you, Sabrina. She said that I would love his account, and I started reading his posts, and I totally felt inspired by it. So she was right. It's a lot of things that you and I have been talking about, Alison. And he did, so Quetzal eats an ancestral style diet, kind of locavore, whatever you want to call it. And he used to be a vegan. And so I know we have plant-based, vegan, vegetarian, maybe even raw vegan listeners. And so I don't want anybody to feel like it's this thing I want to balance very carefully. I want to talk about why I have come to believe that ancestral food is so important to the human body, but I also want to be so respectful of the different views and personal feelings of our listeners. You know what I mean? Because food and all of that can be really personal. And so I think I said this in the first episode of our podcast when you asked me, why do you eat this way? I said, I'm going to get hate mail if I say the wrong thing, because being prescriptive with a diet is a really dangerous thing. I don't really think anybody wants to stand up and say the entire world should eat this specific thing, because I don't really think that works. We all live in different places. We have different, things, challenges we're dealing with. We have different, regional things available, so I think there is fluctuation in what's good for you specifically. However, I do feel very passionately about a lot of these ancestral preparation techniques, and to be totally honest, about animal products and how they should be a part of our lives. And part of that is because we have yet to find a vegan ancestral society. There were some vegetarian, but very few. And by and large, it was Quetzal's, he did a Instagram live where he talked about some of the things that we'll cover in here. But he was saying that our ancestors, living, there was no grocery stores, there was no, quinoa and tofu flown in from other countries or anything like that. Yeah. And he said they utilized every kingdom available to them, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, all the kingdoms were a gift from the creator, and they accepted and utilized them all, which has changed in our modern perspective where we have a choice to go to a store and buy something else. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So that I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but that video really inspired me, and I immediately reached out to him and I asked him, hey, we have a new podcast. It's, small, and I would really appreciate talking to you. And he immediately replied and said, absolutely. So that was real honor, and I really appreciate him doing that. And if you listen to this later, Quetzal, thank you. I really appreciate it, because it means a lot to our listeners, because I was talking to friends who are, former plant-based, and then also friends who are currently vegan, and they have been impacted by his videos, and they really would appreciate hearing somebody unpack a lot of this, on air. And he's very open and very, just very honest about his experiences, because Quetzal was vegan himself before. So he's coming to this from the perspective of somebody who was vegan and now isn't.
And what did you take from the conversation? What were the things that really carried for you?
Well, okay, so that's a good question, Alison. There's a lot that I took. It's a hard one to answer. I have not been myself vegan. So I'm looking at this, you were raw vegan yourself, and you were vegan before that. And Quetzal himself was also vegan. So you two both have a slightly deeper perspective, maybe even emotions associated with it than I do, where I'm an outsider looking in and to the world of veganism with no personal experience. Now, I did kind of dabble, if that's the way to say it, in vegetarianism and then veganism, because I think you and I have agreed, Alison, it seems like virtually everyone in the ancestral food world was a vegan or vegetarian at some point.
So many of people who I talk to who are now eating ancestral have had periods or have come directly from veganism or raw veganism. I think there's a certain type of person who's willing to change the way their habits are and the way their life is, and really cares about what they put in their body and cares about what's going on around them. And really those traits sometimes go through both what can seem opposite, raw veganism and ancestral food. And so that's why I think there's lots of people who both have been, prominent in their lives.
Yeah. Well, I agree, because even Lexi, who we just interviewed for the Patreon. So if you're a patron of the podcast, there's a special bonus episode with Lexi that just went up where she talked about a meal planning for a family with ancestral food and local eating. And she said too that she and her family went through, I forget if it was vegan. I guess it was vegan. Yeah. Cause she said they had no butter, no milk, no honey.
Yeah.
And her kind of transformation actually brought her out the other side through eating ancestral. And so I don't want to, in no wise would I ever devalue, the process or the experience of being vegan, because I agree with you, Alison, that I think it is somebody who is like very earnest. They'll give up. I mean, you're giving up bacon and cheese. Yeah. You'll give up a lot. You're willing to take things off of your plate to do the right thing, even if it's things that you may have grown up eating or that you think are conventionally good. And that, I think, is, you encounter that in ancestral too, because in ancestral food, in a way, you're saying, hey, all food is available, but not the food that's the modern synthetic manufactured, genetically modified type things. It's more in the sense of all the natural foods. If you were to go back 500 years type thing, those foods are all available, and the preparations matter. And so I feel like the transition maybe from veganism to ancestral food could be a natural and an organic one, because again, you're willing to take things off your plate. You're willing to take the time to prepare things. You're willing to look harder, go farther to source things, whatever you need to do. And those are all things that you kind of have to commit to in a way for the ancestral diet. And I think we also said this in one of our early podcasts, that you and I today, as people who, eat organ meats and muscle meats and milk products and all these things, we have more probably in common with our vegan brothers and sisters than we do with, our average fellow meat eater, because we too care deeply about the source and the treatment of not just the animals, but the plants and the soil and the the waterways as well. So Alison, I wanted to ask you, so you already listened to this episode. You kind of got the insider scoop, and you got to listen to it straight from the server. And you, having been vegan, Quetzal's a man, you're a woman, you both went through vegan lifestyle for a while. Your perspective is slightly different, and you wanted to speak to some of the things that he talked about that you had a slightly different experience with. So I want to open up the floor to you for a couple minutes, Alison, so we can hear about your experience here.
Yeah, so anyone who hasn't picked up from previous podcast, I was raw vegan for 2 years, and before that I was vegan. And so just listening to the interview was really... It kind of threw me back to that space. So it was quite emotional because, as you said, food is a very kind of personal thing. Yeah. And the reason I the reason I went into raw veganism was for health. And Quetzal talks quite a lot about health throughout your discussion. And I believed at the time it would make me healthier. And to some extent it did. Prior to going down the route of veganism and raw veganism, one of the health issues that I had that bothered me the most was my menstrual cycle. I've got PCOS, polycystic ovaries, and I've got a really long history up to that point of extended lengths of time with no cycle, months, sometimes years. And then when I did have a cycle, when my periods came, they'd be very heavy, very painful, and I'd get vertigo with them that literally would stop me for a couple of days. And you and Quetzal talk about that in your chat, the idea of fertility and veganism. And I wanted to speak to it a little bit because, as you said, I've got a different experience to him, and it's something else to throw into the pot, as it were. Right. So interestingly, when I went raw vegan, my period stopped, just like Quetzal talks about. And obviously that is not a good thing from the outside, but to some extent I was relieved because I was going through a not very nice experience and had been really since I was a teenager, you know, for over a decade. And I know that it's not an isolated case. It wasn't just me that this happened to. I know that it often happens when people follow a vegan diet that your periods stop. And the way that Quetzal explained it in your discussion, which people will hear in just a moment, is that the vegan community kind of bright sides that idea as a sign of purity, that you don't have a cycle. And when I go back to what happened to me and my understanding at the time, because I did quite a lot of research on it because I was a woman and because it happened to me. And really in the vegan and the raw vegan world, there were quite a lot of prominent figures saying that they were indeed having a cycle. So they were ovulating, and they could tell that by taking their temperature. But they weren't bleeding, or they weren't bleeding heavily, because their body didn't need to. Their idea was that their bodies could reabsorb the lining of their womb because of the less toxicity floating around in their system. Right. So that's a bit different to what Quetzal says when you talk to him. But if I bring it back to me again, that didn't happen to me. I know I wasn't ovulating. I had an absence of a cycle at all. And it was really coming back to ancestral eating, which, as you said, respects the animal, the environment, and the body as its core, just as strongly as veganism wants to. Those two things are strong in both of those styles of eating. It was ancestral eating that solved my menstrual cycle issue. So my periods came back. And it was in that journey, coming back to saturated fat and animal produce, that I was able to get pregnant. So I'd been when I got pregnant with my son, with Gabriel, I'd been 5 years without a cycle at all. And literally within a few months of changing to ancestral eating and monitoring my temperature, watching what was happening to my body, I was pregnant. And ever since then, my periods have been regular and much less traumatic than they were prior to that. So I'd say, yes, raw veganism was bad for me menstrually, and ancestral eating has, in quotes, fixed that, because it has. But I would say that, just like Quetzal says, I don't think being raw vegan was all bad for me. He says at some point in the interview, I think, that it was for him to some degree necessary. And for me, it feels like part of my journey to get to ancestral eating was having to go through veganism, and my body changed because of that time that I was raw vegan. And it's important to me, having listened to the interview, to tread delicately, like you said, when talking about veganism and ancestral eating in the same context, because, as you said, there are core values that are really the same. You know, most people renounce meat eating because the norms of standard farming are absolutely abhorrent, and anyone who cares and is informed can see that. You know, that's something that is clear. If you're willing to look at it and feel that pain, you're going to feel moved. And veganism appears to have less impact on the world from an ethics standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and a health standpoint. And like you said, vegans are actually doing something. They're doing something because they care about the ethics.
Yeah.
They're doing something because they care about their health, like I was. And they're doing something because they care about the environment, just like we do.
Right.
And obviously, we disagree on how to fix those things, but we do agree that 95% of what goes on in the Western world around food is completely wrong. And the most important thing to me around that, and around all the work that I do around food, and the same for you, I believe, is that we want to change that. So in order to change that, we need to come together. We need to leave the door open for people who are eating differently to how we are. Right. And as Quetzal says at one point, so rightly in the interview, we need to connect on a human level first, before we connect on a dogmatic level, or on a level of actually what the things are we're doing every day. And I think that's vital. There's so much out there with vegans and ancestral eaters battling. And if we go beyond that and connect as people and connect as the things we believe in first, then there's room for us to move together as much as we can and learn from each other.
Yeah.
What do you think about all that, Andrea?
I totally agree. And I I do agree with you also, where I think that there are some stages and some phases where that it's totally been appropriate for people. And again, I'm not here to talk about this because I need personally to convert you, to eat butter. Literally, you can. I don't care if you sit on your couch and eat Pop-Tarts and watermelon for the rest of your life. Like, it's your choice, you make the choice. But the reason I've connected on this really is, the more you kind of look at these different foodways, some of these foodways, I don't know if this is too much to say, but there might be an agenda behind some of the, popular trends that are out there that may be a very dangerous one. And maybe not to you specifically, but on when, it's comes out to a grand scale. So I will link in the show notes. There is an Instagram account. Like I said, Alison and Quetzal, you both were vegan. I have not been vegan, so I don't have a personal experience to share. But the Holistic Mother shares on Instagram. She shared very openly her experience, and then that sparked quite a response from people sending in their experience as well. And she addresses some of these, really some of the political movements that may be driving some of this, some of the aspects, you know, of the, you know, plant-based movement when it comes, anything that comes from the government, I look at it with a side eye. But I also wanted to say right before we close and let everybody enjoy Quetzal's interview, there's a quote from Joel Salatin that has stuck in my head for a long time, and he said, "There's no such thing as an animalless ecology." So when, you know, the government or whatever, whoever tells you that animals are the problem, we know that's kind of a myth, you know, in terms of our environment. You know, our environment literally cannot exist without animals. So the question then, I think, is the bigger question that needs to be addressed, which I think vegans have hit right on the head and are very passionate about, is that there's no such thing as an animalless ecology, but you're not doing the animal part right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's abusive practices both to the animals and to the land. And I think vegan communities in particular recognize that and are actually willing to do something about it and are willing to face that, which, you know, just a lot of people are just not willing to look at it. And we just want to close our eyes and not hear the screaming, you know. But just like you said, Alison, I don't want to slam the door in somebody's face. I don't want to be offensive. I don't want to be rude. But I do want to talk about things that are hard to talk about. And this is one of those things.
Yeah, you're right. So should we leave the listeners with the interview now? I know we've talked about it so much, they actually get to listen to it because it's such a good interview.
It's the appetizer.
You've got some wonderful things about reverence for the land, for everything around us, about the cycle of life, about local food, about connection with nature. And it's really, it's a wonderful listen. Do be aware that there is some occasional light swearing in the episode. So if you are in sensitive company, you might want to pop in your earbuds and listen that way. But I really do hope you enjoy it. And I'm so grateful, Andrea, for you interviewing Quetzal. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. Jacob just came down and told me one of the chicks hatched overnight. Can I come up and get it in just a minute?
I looked up Alison, when I came right back from the cat food.
Okay.
I heard it.
All right. Well, speaking of animals, I will be going upstairs and outside to tend to ours. So yes, thank you for the warning, Alison. There was a little bit of swearing in there. So, all right, let's let everybody enjoy. And here's the interview with myself, Andrea, and Wild Quetzal. Welcome everybody back to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast. I'm so excited to be here with, you have an awesome Instagram account. And how do you want me to address you on here? What is best for you?
Quetzal.
Quetzal? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm on here with Quetzal, and he has an awesome Instagram. It's linked in the show notes so you guys can see it. A few friends sent it to me saying, this is something you would love. And thank you, Sabrina, for sending me that video that he posted. I have been watching all your videos and you did an awesome live the other day that it was just really profound and really impacted me. And it touched on some things that Alison and I have briefly mentioned on the podcast. And I felt like you are just the right person to expand on this and help unpack it for all of us. So what your live was about the other day was, well, basically in short, did our ancestors eat vegan? And if we're not eating vegan, are we, not being connected to our earth and our own ancestry? And so how do you want to begin talking about this, Quetzal? Because it was...
Well, I think that it's important to I'll tell my story of how I kind of came to this point, because I think that that's important. So myself, the reason that I have a lot of insight on the way that vegans or plant-based people think is because I was vegan or plant-based for 5 years myself, and very going deep into this lifestyle and this way of thinking and exploring, this path. And so for me, it began through my brother kind of just came at me at the right time when I was open and receptive, and he just basically was telling me like, oh, we're not supposed to be eating this way, and at that point it was, he was impacted by being raw vegan and no cooked food, just basically plants. Just vegetables, fruits, and nuts and seeds was the gist of it. And I completely changed my diet the next day. Like that was it. Like I just cold turkey cut off. I was eating just kind of like a standard American diet at the time. I was kind of into bodybuilding, so I had my little like chicken and rice and little meals that I would prep, but I wasn't conscious on the level of like where things were coming from. It was just like kind of like fuel and just eat whatever is available. So, I went through that process of being very much into raw veganism, going through that transition. And really for me, I felt like shit. Like I didn't have no energy, but there was a story that I kept telling myself of, well, this is part of the process. You're just detoxing. These are kind of the things that come along with embracing that lifestyle, and what you'll hear as a vegan, as a plant-based eater. And what people will tell you is, well, you're just detoxing, or you just need to eat more bananas. You just need to eat more of this or more of that, right? And it's like, it's very challenging for your body to like transition into this different way of eating, just cold turkey, because I think our bodies get used to certain nutrients, So I'm not the one that's like, oh, I felt great for a while, and then I felt like shit. I felt bad from the beginning, and I just kept powering through. And I was working a warehouse job at the time, so it was very challenging for me because I was working a warehouse job, so it was very intense, labor, and I was eating a raw vegan diet. So I was just like, sometimes I would just be like going through it as I'm stocking these boxes on the pallets. And it was just it was a very challenging experience. But like I said, I kept telling myself the story, you're detoxing, you're healing, and I think to some degree it was necessary. Like, that's why I don't like to like talk bad about veganism, because I think that it's necessary at some point for some people in their life. And so for me, I think that just removing a lot of the stuff that I was doing led me to expose myself to myself and to really realize a lot of things that I now have the awareness of. So, long story short, continue that path, eventually started eating some cooked vegan food. And then the big thing was when we came here to Hawaii, where we live with my family, my wife and my son. He was just born, and my wife was basically, she was lost so much weight, and within like a week of reincorporating some like eggs and some fish and some local stuff that was here, she picked up like 10 pounds, started feeling better. The baby started looking better. He had like jaundice and stuff. So I just started to see. And the thing is that I had heard this message much before I was ready to embrace it. So this is things that were in the back of my head, like, or our ancestors, how they ate, this whole component of this diet that is kind of new and modern, but then people try to attach it to ancestral ways, and it just doesn't line up. So I think that that's the clarification with that video that you're talking about, that I was trying to bring to the table, is that we have to acknowledge that this is a new phenomenon, because what a lot of people are doing is saying like, oh, well, no, our ancestors, actually, they were vegan, and this is just suppressed information. There's a conspiracy theory, that prior to colonization, there was that these indigenous people were eating vegan. And I'm like, no, we don't have to distort the traditions and the history of what has existed. If you want to embrace that, go ahead. But I think that we should make it clear that this is a rather new experiment, and the circumstances that allow it to happen and to exist are only so because of the displacement that's happened. These resources that are getting hauled in for you to have produce year round, that doesn't grow where you live, and especially not year round. Everything in nature is seasonal. So we have this system that allows people to go in a grocery store and get the same food year round. Every day they can go and surely enough, it's going to be there stocked up. So people begin to feel a sense of security around this dietary lifestyle, to where it's like, wow, this does feel better, superior. But my thing is just pointing out that this is not necessarily natural in the way that we've been taught, because that's one of the things that I came with veganism was like, well, let me get closer to nature. I felt in some way that I was getting closer to nature, but when I really looked at it, half of the people, or most of the people, I should say, that are pushing this lifestyle didn't really have a connection or relationship to the landscape, to the environment, to actually the plants that they were consuming. So I said this in my live yesterday, that we can be infinitely irreverent to plants. Like, people can consume plants without no reverence, but then when people consume animal foods, they demand that you have reverence. When, traditionally, indigenous cultures, our ancestors, they would have seen these things both as sacred to have reverence for, but somehow we create a hierarchy to where we don't hold people accountable for being irreverent to their plant foods, but people demand it when it comes to animal foods, because obviously there's emotional attachments in the programming of the, all these documentaries that have aired that have really tugged at people's, heartstrings. And so I think for me, my mission is just undoing a lot of the myths and propaganda that aren't based in reality. Because I'm not the person that's like, don't be vegan. Like, do what you want to do, but don't distort reality. Don't change the history. Don't tell a narrative of our ancestors that isn't accurate. That is what, I was alluding to in that live, just to not change what is, just to accept it. And if you want to move forward and eat plant-based, okay, cool. But then I also want to remind you that the system that allows you to do that is only so because of what has happened, like this displacement of resources and whatnot.
Yeah. Wow. I love everything that you just said, and you articulate it in such one of the things that struck me about your account when I first found you was that you were sharing these really, really strong messages, but it never felt aggressive or like you were angry at somebody for going through their own journey. And that, I think, is really rare, because it's either, I feel like there's a lot of accounts that are almost religiously, whatever it is that they are, and you're not allowed to come to a conclusion. You're just wrong if you're not thinking the same way. So I think that your message is probably reaching a lot more people, because like, you post videos that I am willing to share with friends who are vegan and vegetarian, because they don't feel mean about it. It's just, I really appreciate the way that you said all of that. You said something in your live about grocery stores, and I was trying to write it down, but then the next thing you said was really good, and so I wrote that down instead. But you said something about you're shopping in the same place, or you're just going to the grocery store, and
you're just shopping from a different aisle.
Yeah, that's what you said.
What I said.
Yeah, you're getting your food from the same place, just shopping from a different aisle. That was really, really impactful to hear it said that way. I come from the farming perspective. I have had the joy of working on a couple farms, and one thing that I saw was in the monocrop fields around us, because the farms I worked on were biodynamic, organic ones, and in the fields around us, the slaughter of small animals in the process of harvesting soy was just one thing that struck me personally. Was, wow, I knew people who were buying tofu instead of chicken, and then I was watching millions of creatures die under these machines, and I just thought, I don't know that was my kind of glimpse into, I don't know that this is really all that it's chalked up to be.
Right. And I think that's one of the great illusions that is being perpetuated, that we can somehow escape this cycle of life and death, right? That you can just shop from a certain aisle, and that you're basically doing the most righteous thing that you can by doing that. And I think that one of the things that I came to realize is that we can't escape it. Like, I think that we have to confront that life and death cycle at some point in our life. And the more we try to elude that, that's when we create these philosophies of like abstaining from meat, abstaining from animal products. Then people go extreme, like fasting, and then they don't even want to walk on the ground because they don't want to crush any microscopic insect that might exist. And it's like we're failing to embrace the reality that we were born into. We're put here to experience this, because at the end of the day, we're not making it out alive either, but because we have such a disdain for death, that's where this life extension, and people are trying to elude death because they don't want to die themselves. So they say, well, I don't want other organisms to die. But then I ask myself, what does that do for the greater picture? Like if right now other organisms started to say, well, we don't want to die either, we're not going to die. And we started to make that a reality, that just interrupts the whole cycle. You know what I'm saying? So it's rather than people embracing this life and going through it and accepting it for what it is, because we're sheltered from nature and we're not seeing that on a day-to-day basis, we can conjure up these philosophies of like, oh, well, I don't want nothing to suffer. I don't want nothing to experience pain. That's because we're sheltered. But in reality, that's a reality of life and nature, especially. It's not something for us to eliminate. It's something for us to get in tune with and get aligned with, because some people say you're a humanist, or you feel you're superior to other organisms because you're eating them. And I say, no, you feel like you're superior to nature because you're trying to supersede the order of nature. There's an order that's innate to nature, and you think that you can go above that and escape the outside of that without no consequences. To me, that's the ego. That's a certain type of ego that is centered around the human world. Like a lot of these things that people pose as questions are coming from a human-centered perspective. Even this idea of we're talking about what's best for our health. We want to live longer. We want to be comfortable. It's all based around humans and what's best for humans. But sometimes some of these things that we want that are best for us, or we feel are best for us, have a negative impact on the other organisms, on the other cycles. So, that's how far back I take this, because some people's approach is to like, I don't resist what this reality is. I accept that, that there's death, that there's life, and they both cycles that feed one another. I'm not trying to get in the way of that. Like that's why I'm not going to preach like, oh, eat this way to extend your life, or eat this way to, to live longer. Like that's not a talking point that I want to use, because at the end of the day, people can leverage that to create some crazy extreme diets. Like, okay, if you put a bunch of stem cells in somebody and create this artificial environment, yeah, they might live longer, but is that what we're supposed to be doing? Like, is that in line with the cycle of nature and everything else? Like, so yeah, that's how I think about that.
It does make a lot of sense when you explain. I mean, at first blush, it sounds like you're trying to do the selfless thing to eat a vegan diet, right? I don't want something with a face to die. But in your life, you also said that that's a narcissistic worldview, that to say everything in nature has, a descending value based on how close it is to representing me. And that was a really fascinating perspective to hear.
Right. Yeah. I don't think people realize that they're doing that. I think they just doing it. And then when I point it out, it's like, wow, like it just makes sense, but it's like, it just happening naturally out of people, when they take this approach, because that's how I look at it. And that's kind of how it unravels when somebody's vegan or plant-based and they have a compassion for animals. they tend to have, like, if it's a mammal, they're going to have more compassion for that mammal over an insect.
Mm.
They're going to have more compassion for insect over a plant. They're going to have more compassion for a plant over bacteria that they can't really see and have a tangible exchange or relationship with. So it's just this order of magnitude. It's relative to us. So from another organism's perspective, I'm sure they would be like, well, if I'm an insect, I want to, my hierarchy is an insect. So whatever's closest to an insect, that's what I want to align myself with. So for humans, obviously, if you're a chimpanzee, I can connect with you and I can see myself in you a lot more than I would with an insect. So I'm gonna have more compassion for you. So that's just that phenomenon. That's what I see when people do that and organize life in that way. Because when we're talking about sentience, right, this is one of the things that veganism is kind of centered around, this idea of that animals are sentient. But then when I ask myself, well, sentience, why are you picking sentience as a quality to uphold or to put higher on the hierarchy? Because we have sentience, because we identify with sentience within ourselves. So you wouldn't say like a plant is sentient, but you can, and we do know that plants experience stress, like cells experience stress. All order life experiences stress. It's a signal. It's a signal from life telling you there's something happening or you need to make a change or something. But when we on mammals and higher order organisms, that turns into sentience. And so that word right there is one of the words that is leveraged to protect some of the, more advanced organisms against death, which is something that we all going to face. I'm not trying to protect anything or anybody. That's not my approach. So I just breaking down the different talking points that kind of get thrown around, right? And people never think about them. They're like, oh yeah, like we go with our emotion. What I'm trying to bring is an objective breakdown of this whole thing. Let's take our emotions out of it. And that's why I say a lot of times, okay, stop identifying with this way of eating. Stop identifying with this for a moment, because you were this person before you started eating, and you'll be this way and you'll be this person after. So because you have such a strong emotional attachment to this way of eating, you've intertwined it with your identity. I can't use a talking point or present any information that would contradict that, because you're going to feel attacked, because you feel like I'm attacking you personally, because you've intertwined it with your own identity. So first we have to realize that we can coexist with despite the fact that we eat two different ways. We have to connect on a human level first, because if not, we're just going to be battling each other. And then you get to this whole point of like science articles, right? People start bringing up science articles, and that's another thing within itself that you can find science articles on anything, scientific articles on that will back up a vegan diet, that will back up a carnivore diet. So it's like we're getting to a point where science is almost becoming subjective in a way, to where people making it mean whatever they want it to mean. So it's like I had to break away from that, because I was very deep into the science of things. So that led me to just analyze what ancestral people have done, and to use real life experience as a metric, to how should we eat, because otherwise we get lost in the science. If we're not tracking our body, if we're not seeing how we feel, if we're not going to see how people actually live, then everything else is kind of just open for interpretation. That's why I said, if aliens came down to Earth and they analyzed humans and said, like, how we do, we'll go into the jungle and we're like, oh, well, chimpanzees eat this is their diet, and this, we don't say, oh, this is what they should be eating. Like it would be nice if they only ate this, but we do that with ourselves. We see that humans eat omnivorously. They eat plants, but they also eat meat. They eat from anything that's really available in their environment. That's one of the fascinating things about humans, that they have made these seemingly inhospitable environments very hospitable for themselves through utilizing all the different kingdoms of life. So if an alien came down, that's what they would describe a human as, an omnivore, objectively. But because we're in it, we have these ideas and these we romanticize our origins. And So we say, oh yeah, we're eating this way now, but we fell from grace because at some point we were eating fruits in the Garden of Eden. That's just like, that's the kind of story that a lot of people have. But when you look at it objectively, okay, that's cool. And that's cool if you want to have that thought, but objectively, what do we do?
Right.
What do we do? What do we observe humans to be doing? And that's what we have to go with, because that's what is being done. That's not theoretical. And it's just what it is. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I, when you talk about looking at what people have always done, I think you said something along the lines of, to think that we have now discovered that all of human history has eaten the wrong way. The hubris of that, now we finally figured it out, is kind of extreme. But the ancestral diets research is actually what brought me back to eating carbohydrates again, because I thought I fell into this trap of thinking, yeah, our ancestors just ran around eating like lions or whatever. And, you know, they didn't eat grains. But then, as you say, be the alien that comes down to earth and look back. No, that's actually not true. Humans have always, anywhere we can find them, we're taking grains. And so that was just an interesting aspect, that I didn't have the vegan perspective, but I had that perspective, and that ancestral research brought me back to that. And it has been really beneficial for me. So I definitely
also, you know, and it's very varied, right? So like, I think one of the things I say is that your environment dictates your diet. So wherever you're at, like, traditionally, that's what it would have been, right? Like your college, you would have said, well, this is what's available. So, I mean, if you go to, you know, in North America, in the Great Lakes regions where they have, you know, abundance of wild rice that was growing there, that was a big staple there. And that's a grain, right? And so people would eliminate that, because in other areas of the world, other humans might not have access to that. So we can't. That's why I say we're on.
They don't eat wild rice. So yeah.
Right. But humans make it work wherever they've existed, and that's the key point that I'm bringing to people's awareness, because people say like, well, they were plant-based, right? They only ate meat on occasion, but it was rare. And so they try to paint this picture like, and that might have been the case for some cultures at some points throughout the year, but that wasn't like a choice, that because they're trying to make it seem like, well, they didn't value animal foods. They just supplemented with animal foods. But, you know, every culture traditionally valued animal foods. They might have not had access to them at the levels that they wanted, but if they had it their way, I'm sure that they would have, you know, wanted more access to those animal foods, because it's a lot of dense nutrition in there, especially during times of reproduction. This is when we see the most need for these higher dense foods, and the most transition of what I see is like these women getting pregnant, having children, and then being like, well, yeah, I started eating animal foods again. Because a lot of people that are vegan or plant-based, they're still running off of the animal foods that they've eaten in their life before. So when you have a child, is like that child is stripping your energy, stripping your minerals, is stripping things from you that you got to replenish. So that's when we see like what really is functional for a human diet when it comes to reproduction, because now we're taking something from the woman that needs to be replenished. And so if it's not replenished in the way that she was before, which was probably animal foods, most people aren't born vegan. That's a very rare, you know, occurrence. So a lot of the people that might have transitioned, they might be vegan a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years. They're still operating from a body that was built off animal foods, but then they're like bashing animal foods, right? So it's like kind of ironic. You rarely get to see like 10, 20-year vegans really in the movie. Is they're more on the rare end. They do exist. But what I'm saying is that a lot of them haven't even endured it long enough to really have a thorough experience with it to say where like your body's actually made out of vegan food. A lot of them are still running off of animal-based foods that they've eaten prior to their veganism. So I think that's the most telling point. If we can reproduce and have viable offspring, and that cycle can be perpetuated in a healthy way, that's a good indication that might work. But when that starts to fluctuate, and that's what we see when these women get pregnant, they start craving meat, or they lose weight and they're not really able to replenish some of those things on a plant-based diet, then we could criticize that point, or we could analyze and be like, well, there might be something there that might be an indicator that that's not the best, or the whole story that we need to be embracing.
Right. And it's so interesting that you use pregnancy as an example, because that's actually what motivated me to start eating carbs again. By the time I got to my third pregnancy, I was just like, this isn't working. So,
did you see the video, the live that me and my wife did?
when? I did not see that.
Yeah, we just did a live, and we're basically, because I had made a post and I basically said, can animal foods heal, right? And I was asking people to share their testimony. So we went live and got people to come on camera and share their story. But we talk about our story and coming here and starting to incorporate animal foods again. But I share a video where this guy is asking a hunter-gatherer tribe what's the most important thing in life. And the first thing he says is meat. And the second thing he says is honey. So I just reminded me, because you're just talking about carbohydrates, and a lot of people, you know, they've been another movement that is happening.
Out and yeah,
is this whole ketogenic diet and really abstaining from carbohydrates. But that's another thing, another myth, you know, like all these hunter-gatherer tribes, they're eating honey any chance they can get it, you know, and so you know, we don't see that as, what was that?
I was saying, you see them climb those trees and get stung and everything, and they're just like grinning and happy as can be, because they're like, honey.
Exactly. Yeah. So it definitely plays a role in the diet.
You know, a lot of these diets that you're referring to, women will not have a cycle for years and years on that, and that's not normal. You know, a cycle is, right. I think some people call it, what is it, the fifth vital sign or something, you know, showing that your body is working well. So it's,
but yeah. You know what they would say in the vegan world, right?
What? No, I don't.
Because that's been differently in that world. If you don't have a cycle, that's a sign of purity in that world. So they're basically saying,
we're back to, they're not just humans are the pinnacle, men are the pinnacle. Because if we're like a man without a cycle, the more pure we are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that, or you could say that at least women have an indicator of their purity.
Yeah.
You know, like to where that's the mindset that they look at it from, to where if you don't have a cycle as a woman, they're thinking, well, that's good because your body doesn't need a cleanse because you're so clean. But then from another perspective, like ancestrally, like in how I would look at it is like, no, your body is telling you you're not equipped to have a child.
Right.
At this moment.
In every other kingdom, if you can't reproduce, that's the end. You know,
right.
You know, I have bok choy that I planted, but it bolted the first day it got hot, because all it wants to do is produce flowers and seeds. It doesn't want to produce the leaves, you know, it just wants flowers and seeds so it can reproduce. And I have like 100 chickens, and you can watch them reproduce all day long in the yard.
Yeah. They're
passionate about it.
Yeah, no, that's one of like the basic components of life that you're going to see is reproduction, eating, reproduction. And, you know, it's very basic, but when you take one out, that's a very detrimental sign in any population of any organism. The inability to reproduce is, but, you know, that's why I'm just trying to point out these inconsistencies, because psychologically, I think that is doing something to people that they're not really realizing. So when you start to see and live through this lens, it's like, well, you don't believe that you're pure enough, and you have to get to this level of purity to where you become infertile because you're so pure, but it's actually glorified as something to attain to, you know? And for me, it's like, okay, like how long is that going to, what if we all embrace that? Like the human race is be over pretty quick.
Well, maybe what some people want.
Right.
That's also the hallmark of a lot of diets that you see popular in like popular media or whatever are based on one thing. Do you lose weight? And every other marker of a healthy life is ignored. Like, are you raging angry all the time because you haven't had sugar in years? Do you fog? You can't think. Are you losing weight to the point of being malnourished and skinny? And is your temperature, 95 degrees and you have no cycle and all these things, your heart rate's 50 beats per minute. Like, there's a lot of things that are left out of the equation, and all we look at doesn't make you lose weight.
That's a good point. And people often embrace a lot of these diets because they do want to lose weight, or it's coming from more of a superficial point of view. And so it's like in a natural environment, humans wouldn't be focused on prioritizing their physique, over everything else. That's just like a modern phenomenon in what we see with social media and Hollywood and all this. They set a certain standard for people that want to attain to it, and so they utilize some of these diets to get there. But for me, it goes beyond that. I think health is a byproduct of being in tune with your environment, being in tune with nature, being in tune with yourself and your body. Like, if you can check those boxes off, health is just going to happen. It's not something that you have to neurotically be focused on, like some of the way that people will be supplementing and taking notes and having all these things that, they're neurotic about. And it just gets to a point where that becomes even a stressor on your life, to have to think so hardly and so deeply about every little thing that you come into contact with your body or in your reality.
Right. It's the quote, physique is your symptom of, a healthy diet. And I think a lot of us, one thing that I've been learning from some of the other speakers that I've been listening to as well, is a lot of us have treated our bodies so badly for so many years that, when you transition towards what is your ancestral diet or things that feel like they're nourishing you, you might initially gain some weight, or you won't lose weight right away, maybe because it's not focused on weight loss. It's focused on getting your entire body to like this healthy point. You have a lot of organs that need to be addressed, and a lot of glands and things that need to learn how to function again, that are, this from eating vegan for so long, your body will survive, but it's working overtime to try to convert things and try to transition, basically try to turn your plant food into animal food. And you don't have 3 stomachs. You can't extract out of, grass what a cow could do for you. So,
I mean, yeah, for sure. But that's not the talking points that they use, because that's another thing. They'll be like, oh, well, look at the gorilla, look at the elephant. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but they're eating plants all day, like hundreds of pounds of plants. Is that what you're trying to do? Eat hundreds of pounds? Like, you have to dedicate your life to just eating plants all day. And gorillas have a much larger gut than us. Like, ours is much smaller. And so we're comparing ourselves and our anatomy to these organisms who are vastly different. Like, there might be some similarities, but is the nuance. You have to go into the nuance and ask yourself, like, oh, well, are you willing to if you're using this animal as an example, this specimen, are you willing to mimic other areas of its life or how it gets that energy by eating all day? Or are you just, we're just being very surface level when people make comments like that. But people run with it because most people aren't going to go into the nuance of things, because it's like, it takes more effort. It takes more energy to like actually have to do this kind of research to just kind of debunk these talking points that are often used that when I hear them now, it's just like I know who I'm dealing with now. Like if it's somebody who's like, oh, the gorilla's big or the elephant's big because of plants, so I can be big because of plants too. It's just like you not seeing the whole picture.
Okay. Can I go back to something you touched on earlier? I don't know how much time you have, but if I could get one more thing out of you, even though I have 101 questions, but I do encourage everybody, go to Quetzal's Instagram. It's really good. There's lots of videos you can watch. And I was scrolling down really far, and wasn't that a video of you when you were eating vegan and you were pretty thin?
Yeah.
Thin, yeah. But you talked about when we don't have our connection to, the fact that we're also going to die one day and go back into the earth. So when that made me think, I used to volunteer in a hospice, and one of the things I learned when I went through the training was that in our culture, we're highly resistant to death, even the death of our elders who have lived 100 years and are just kind of succumbing,
Right.
Not like they fell off of a cliff or something, So one of the things the nurses told us was that a lot of times a family member will be in the hospital bed for like days, just kind of lingering. And people will be taking turns sitting around. And then the hospice volunteer, which was our role, would come in and give you a break and say, okay, go to the bathroom, go down, get food, whatever. And she said, oftentimes, as soon as the family member left, the person, the bed would die. And family members would say, oh, see, I knew it. I shouldn't have left. And she said it was just that the person couldn't pass away until a hospice member came. And our role was to be comfortable with death and to say, right, hey, it's okay. Like if you're ready to go, you can cross, like it's fine. And lots of just beautiful, wonderful experiences in that. But then that made me think about like the Western culture is where we see veganism being, I feel like, just from my perspective, it's like I see a lot of people in like Western society promoting it. But I have friends in like many countries in Africa, and none of them have ever said to me for 1 second that has ever crossed their mind. They don't all eat the same as each other. They're in highly diverse regions, but they all eat some of them take blood and milk from cows, and others like eat like whole chickens. And so I was just wondering if you think that it's more prevalent in Western society, and also if you think that's associated to just our like inability to cope with death as a society here.
Yeah, for sure. I think for sure it is a phenomenon of Western culture. Like popular culture is just this extreme disconnection from that cycle. And if you think about that whole process, when people start to get to an age where they're getting older and getting closer to that point in their life, they're kind of tucked away to areas of society where we don't really want to look at them. So that's why we have like elderly homes, and we have these places to where we don't want to see this process unfold, because it's like we're almost trying to forget that it exists, and that inevitably we will also succumb to that. So I think that ideally we would exist in a community where we would see birth and death on a constant basis, and we would have a comfortable relationship with that. And that would be within the human population, the population of humans in the community, but also through the process of just seeing organisms in our ecology going through that as well. So you might see like, a population of deer that have, they have their offspring, and we also might see, other animals dying, but then we would experience that within our tribe as well, within our community of people, of children being born and elderly people passing on. But there's no role that is enforced or that is culturally appropriate for elderly people in our modern world, right? They don't really have this purpose to where they would have had a purpose in a community context, to where they might be taking care of like the children, or might be instilling the wisdom that they learned throughout their life. And so that would have given them purpose, instead of them just kind of waiting idly by till they, transition, till they pass away. So I think that that's a big part of it too, that we don't have the type of culture that is set up to give these people in this stage of their life a purpose. So we kind of just tuck them away, put them over here, and we just don't know how to deal with them. But on another level as well, is just that we don't have those experiences enough to have a healthy relationship. And that's one of the things that I think incorporating animal foods, and as I'm getting into hunting and fishing and these processes that put me face to face with this process, is healing my relationship to death, because I feel like I'm coming from that culture too, of where I wasn't very comfortable with death, and it's something that I really want to think about, but it's something that I think about a lot more often when I see the food on my plate, and I'm grateful for it, and it just reminds me of the life cycle. So I think when we disconnect from that, because we all, like I said, we're all gonna get there, but when you get there, how will you react? Like you said, you saw a lot of people that were highly resistant to death, to that process. And I think ideally we want to get to a point where when we get to that point, we're not resisting. We're accepting that it is our time, and that we don't go out fighting, that we just allow for that process to occur, because that's what's supposed to happen, And so, like, I think a lot of these things are derivatives of being disconnected from that process and wanting to further insulate ourselves from that reality. Yeah.
Right. But, I mean, when you describe everything that way, it makes me think we don't want our elders to die, but we don't want to see them either. That's just a horrible
right.
paradigm, cognitive dissonance there. And just totally mind blowing.
Right. And it's just like, I mean, I think morally people want to have that perspective, like, oh, I don't want my grandparents to die, or this elderly person that I relate to die. But at the same time, it's like, well, what kind of relationship do you have for them in your life? Or do you just want them to die just based off of what? Like, at the same time, we have to start providing a space for them in our life and incorporating them in our communities, in our families and stuff. That's what traditionally would have been done. So, we can't say that we care about somebody, but then don't have this kind of action around that.
Alison and I always get into these conversations, and then we say, we're just talking. I mean, we just came here to talk about bread or whatever. So, we sit down to talk about, technically we're talking about food, and here we are talking about, the role, the disappearing role of our elders in our society. But that is such a valuable point, and it really is a way to emphasize this is not, ancestral eating, especially what I have found, is not an insulated, aisle of the grocery store with a packaged product. It's really just an entire life, and you can't pull one thread out from the other without the whole thing falling apart. And I don't know if that's how industrial food, wants it to be.
Yeah.
So I forgot to ask you one thing when we started. Usually when Alison and I get on, then we ask each other, what is the last meal that we had before getting on, or, maybe a meal that you really just enjoyed. So since we get on to talk about food, so if you want to, do you want to share this, what your last meal before this was?
Yeah. Yeah. But right before this, I had a local mango, and then I had some local eggs and local sausage.
Oh, that sounds so perfect. That sounds perfect.
Like, it was all like, and actually now that I think about it, my coffee was local. Like that's one of the things that I really try to focus on is local. Like, I try to make the larger percentage of what from where we at, so all these things that I ate this morning, actually, now that I think about it, was local. Really everything. Okay, let me break it down. My coffee is local coffee from Hawaii, from this island, but in it is local honey from the island and local cinnamon from the island.
Oh, that's awesome. The things you get by the equator just blow my mind.
I'm telling you, I think this is like a best kept secret. Like, I don't think people realize that what's available here. I mean, I love the tropics because it's just life grows easily here. Like, it just thrives, like fruits and vegetables and stuff. But on top of that, on this island, they've introduced several species of game, and they also raise cattle, free range. I mean, I don't think there's any factory farming on the island. But the cows that I see, they have a beautiful life. Like, they are ocean views with beautiful weather. Is like, is pretty much as good as it gets. And so I'm just very grateful, like, to be here and have this experience, because, we have such an abundance of high quality food.
Mm-hmm. It's such a cool diversity that you get when you're there year round. I mean, we actually we have a lot of diversity that we're able to grow up here too, but it does get pretty cold in the winter and it's pretty, long gray winter and fall, winter and spring.
Yeah.
But it is shocking, I had decided in the beginning of last year just to stop going to grocery stores altogether and just see if we could live. And, that doesn't mean we've never been to a grocery store in between now and then, but almost everything comes from, if you really are looking, then it's amazing what you can find around you. But it does take some dedication. But once you have those, like, you kind of have your infrastructures in place, right? I don't know where you got your produce. Maybe it was a farmer's market, or maybe farmers, and maybe you have a tree in your backyard or whatever. But
yeah,
you kind of got it in place now.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, a lot of people don't realize, like, kind of what's available. So, like, a lot of people believe when I talk about animal foods, they think that can only be found in other countries. For some reason, they think that the U.S. doesn't have high quality animal foods. Mm-hmm. So that's just like a narrative that's been pushed, I guess, in the plant-based agenda or whatever, in the community, I should say, that basically everything's tainted in North America. But I think some of the best, animal foods come out of North America, and you just have to know where to find them. Like, when I used to go to the farmer's market, I remember there being farmers there who raise their own free range game. And obviously you have a large population of wild game and things like that of that nature. But you have people like the Mennonites and the Amish who are, providing butter, really high quality, animal foods like that. So I just think people don't look. They just automatically think that there's something better somewhere else. But usually, if you look around you, there's some good stuff.
It's a story. It gives us a cop out, right? Like, what isn't here anyways? I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure maybe you even said it when you're a vegan, which was, okay, maybe not everybody eats a vegan diet, but if you have the opportunity to, shouldn't you? Yeah. But here, yeah, you're right. There's a lot. And it does take, there's no quick, easy way to find all the best food just on, with one snap of your fingers. I always tell people and you know this, I know you know this. The most important thing is your relationship with your farmer, because one farmer is going to connect you to another farmer, who's going to connect you to another farmer. And there's people who are selling stuff that is never making it to the internet. No, it's not on Instagram, it's not on some website. There are good websites for looking up farms, but a lot of this stuff is just word of mouth if you're willing to put the time in and find it and build the relationship.
For sure. I had a friend who he connected with some guy. He was getting a hold of lobster and all kinds of just like food that the guy was going out and harvesting it. But this guy, he's not putting it up. There's no market where they sell this stuff. It's like, this stuff is like the rarest of the rare stuff because it requires like an individual to actually go and harvest it from the ecology, so people don't realize that the highest quality foods that they can attain to, they're rare. And that's why they're like on the menus of like these high class restaurants. Like they're used like these wild herbs and stuff. Like they often end up in like these restaurants that are, high class because they're rare. They want different flavors and stuff that people aren't familiar with. And so if you put effort, you can find a lot of a lot of different avenues to where you can attain this food. You know, obviously farmers markets, connecting with farmers, foraging, and just going out into the actual landscape yourself and seeing what's available. And we have all kinds of resources, right? We have apps where you can just take a picture and it'll tell you what type of plant that is, if it's edible, and what are its uses. Like we've never been in a time with such an abundance of knowledge to where it's so easily accessible that we should feel the most comfortable now going out and exploring and figuring these things out.
Yeah. Well, I don't have the fantasy that, you know, people who lived on the farms 100 years ago, or, you know, even our ancestors 1,000 years ago lived, you know, the perfect idyllic life or anything. Like, I know that there's a lot of times in history, it's just been really hard to survive and everything. But what I see is at this point, we really are able to combine the best of both worlds. I have a flushing toilet upstairs, you know, and a septic system that handles the waste. So I'm not worrying about cholera or whatever, but at the same time, I still have access to the mountain spring, you know, hand dug well outside, and I can get that same water. Right. So I don't want to like disregard the one gift because I have the other.
Yeah. I think it's, you know, it's not like an all-in proposition to where you have to, and that's the thing that we tend to go extreme when we first get introduced to something. So people will see me on camera talking about something, and they'll be like, "Well, you got an iPhone, or you, how you recording that?" Like, you know, and I'm like, I never said that I was abstaining all this. And at the end of the day, the only reason I'm able to share this message is because I'm embracing technology. There's plenty of people who probably know way more, have many more skills, and who live off grid in a, in a house that they built themselves, but they're not helping anybody with that because they're not reaching back out. Like, so the people that are out here looking and thirsty and hungry for that knowledge, they're not having a source of somebody's direct experience to be provided for. So that's why I have to live like a median. I have to be the bridge for that, because at the end of the day, I enjoy modern luxuries as well. I just try to balance that out with as much as I can through like getting outside and connecting to the earth, foraging for foods, eating local, and doing things that just remind me that I'm human and on the earth, because I don't want to be too far disconnected. But then also, I want to be connected enough to where I can communicate this message to people, and it'll inspire them to go outside and have a connection with nature. So I think that's my motto, balance. You know, that's why I always talk about stay balanced, because don't get too far off, because you're out of balance. You know, you can go all the way extreme, but then you're not of service to the world. You're not able to help and reach back out to people. So, you know, that's one of the things that people come at me a lot for, is for claiming I'm all about nature, but then I'm using technology, you know, because they expect you to be completely abstaining from technology, but at the same time, they want to receive the message that you have, which is.
I really liked that video you posted about sleeping outside, just the one in the tent. And I was going to repost that on because the farm is pretty big, we basically opened it up to be like a campground so people can come out and camp here. So I was like, awesome. Post that for that. I wanted to ask you, do you get lots of like trolls? You know, trolls or haters, or what you want to say? Does that happen? We have a lot of followers.
Well, at some point, I had this video that went viral on TikTok. It has like almost 2 million views. Jeez. and it's got like tens of thousands of comments, and it just sparked the whole conversation. That's when a lot of trolls came. A lot of people were coming at me, and they're just telling me, you're not this, you're not that, you're fake, you're phony. They were calling me I'm a misogynist, I'm racist.
Doing everything about you.
Basically they call me every name in the book, but that was because I had kind of triggered something that people felt immune to. And so I kind of just pointed something out. It was, I don't know if you've seen the video where it's like veganism is a byproduct of colonization, where I'm talking about prior to colonization.
That was a good one.
Yeah, that was the one that really blew up on on TikTok, and a lot of people were mad. And then people who were like, you know, oh, I'm indigenous and I'm vegan, like you. So it's just all around the all around they just were coming at me from all different angles. But it didn't last long, and by now, like in that community, they've already kind of demonized me. So anytime that I make new content, they already kind of address me, and their perspective is kind of set on me. So sometimes when people come out, I'm like, how do you have that perspective? I mean, you've never talked to me. You've never had a conversation with me. You're just basing your judgment of me on something somebody said on the internet. And that's kind of when we get into like a dangerous new culture of people being set in a perspective about somebody without ever having met that person. And that is just so far removed from reality, because we know with the internet, you can distort things so much. You can get a little clip of somebody saying this one thing, and you push that out, it goes viral. And now the people's perception of that person is totally skewed because you didn't get the whole story. So that's why I invite people, like, have a conversation. I did a follow-up video. It was like 40 minutes long, explaining everything that they were talking about me. And somebody said, I don't have 40 minutes. Like, can you just tell me up front? I was like, if you don't have 40 minutes, then you shouldn't be judging me. You shouldn't be, spreading all this misinformation if you can't take 40 minutes out of your day to get to understand me and know me a little bit.
Really great point. Yeah, well, I absolutely love the you put out. I think it's just, it's timely and it's wholesome. And it's really inspiring, honestly.
I think people are receptive to it. And I think we're opening up a conversation and being a bridge for these two worlds.
I think you make it a very, there's going to be people who don't take it this way, but I feel like you make it a very safe, it feels safe to discuss it and to hear you talk about it, because you don't come at it as like threatening and aggressive, dogmatic in any way. And there is that person who's living off grid or whatever you said, off grid in a shack, that they built themselves, and maybe it isn't their calling, to get the word out. So I really appreciate that it's a lot of time, a lot of effort. And then you also took the time to come on this random podcast. So, I saw that live you did, and for everybody who was listening, I was like sending it to everybody, and I was telling them, like, can you believe what this guy's saying? This is so awesome. And then I was like,
grateful.
I'm going to ask him if he can go on the podcast. And so they were all waiting, holding their breath. What's he going to say? And
you probably didn't see, but before, you probably weren't following me, but like maybe a week ago or a couple of weeks ago, I had posted up, like, if anybody wants me to be on their podcast, just reach out to me.
No,
yeah, so
I was following you, but I didn't see that. So I guess it was just.
So I'm open to, as long as it's in the realm of what I talk about, I'm open to having these conversations and these discussions, because I'm really trying to get people understanding. Like, I'm not trying to win per se, like my perspective. I just want us to be able to have this discourse in a very, in a way where we can both gain something from it. And even in the last live, I had somebody who was not totally agreeing with me, but we had a very formal discourse, and it was good. I really enjoyed it. If you get a chance, it's really long. It's like an hour and 40 minutes long. We went on forever, but that live on IGTV, which I'm going to upload to YouTube, and I'll probably be clipping it up. It was along those lines. And that's what people say a lot, like, thank you. They say, thank you for having this conversation in the way that you are, because a lot of people feel the way I feel, and they think the way I think. They've had these thoughts, but they haven't felt liberated to express them. And so that's what I'm trying to open up, especially for like women who are pregnant and going through that, and they're feeling guilty because their body's asking them, like, eat some animal foods, and their friends are like, no, you just need to eat more beans and rice or whatever. And it's like, I want to liberate people from that psychological programming.
Yeah. Well, much gratitude to you and to your family, because it takes, time away from them to share this with me and with all our listeners. So I'm really appreciative to your wife and your child for sharing you with us for an hour.
Yeah, I'm grateful too.
Yeah. Well, I hope maybe someday you would want to come back on again, because I just have 1,000 more questions that I would like to ask. But this was really fantastic, Quetzal, and I really, really, really appreciate it. And I know everybody else does too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm open to that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much. And have an awesome
All right. Like, I'm not trying to win per se, like my perspective. I just want us to be able to have this discourse in a very, in a way where we can both gain something from it. And even in the last live, I had somebody who was not totally agreeing with me, but we had a very formal discourse, and it was good. I really enjoyed it. If you get a chance, it's really long. It's like an hour and 40 minutes long. We went on forever, but that live on IGTV, which I'm going to upload to YouTube, and I'll probably be clipping it up. It was along those lines. And that's what people say a lot, like, thank you. They say, thank you for having this conversation in the way that you are, because a lot of people feel the way I feel, and they think the way I think. They've had these thoughts, but they haven't felt liberated to express them. And so that's what I'm trying to open up, especially for like women who are pregnant and going through that, and they're feeling guilty because their body's asking them, like, eat some animal foods, and their friends are like, no, you just need to eat more beans and rice or whatever. And it's like, I want to liberate people from that psychological programming.
Yeah. Well, much gratitude to you and to your family, because it takes, time away from them to share this with me and with all our listeners. So I'm really appreciative to your wife and your child for sharing you with us for an hour.
Yeah, I'm grateful too.
Yeah. Well, I hope maybe someday you would want to come back on again, because I just have 1,000 more questions that I would like to ask. But this was really fantastic, Quetzal, and I really, really, really appreciate it. And I know everybody else does too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm open to that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much. And have an awesome afternoon.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth, and Alison's at Ancestral_Kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.